All right, gang, welcome aboard. It's time for the weekly Mac Forum video chat, July 17th, 2016. I want to welcome you. Let me get my screen cleared away here. It's a little bit of a mess at the moment. I'll get that out of the way and we can get on with business. First of all, I want to point out to you, as we usually do, we'll start with a little bit of a roundup. We currently have a total of 2,301 active members, uh, 209 more than 291,000 members total, and our newest member is Casey. Looks like Leahy. Sorry if I mispronounced that, Casey. Um, Welcome to the forum for you and for all of our members. As you can see, I've got my screen shared out tonight as we talk about a few things. Nothing major, but figured you didn't really want to see my face this afternoon, this evening. I want to welcome everyone. I hope you enjoy this week's show. Not a lot going on today. Uh, Spent much of the day kind of keeping track of some of the news events that are going on here stateside. Uh, didn't get a chance to put as much time into the show, but we do have a couple of tips and tricks for you. A couple of other things that I want to talk about as we go along. This week in the forum, we had some issues with passwords and people needing to reset their passwords. If you are having that issue and having some difficulty resetting your password, stick with it. It shouldn't be a huge issue for you. Hopefully, we've gotten that pretty much rearranged. But our admin team, our moderation team, is trying to stay on top of that. So if you have any issues with that, please let us know. I think we've got it pretty much taken care of, or at least we're working in that direction. Uh, just a couple of things, other things I want to be sure I mention to you. We've had some posts this week about, as usual, we have lots of stuff on backup and recovery. Let's just take a look at kind of what's new here. Um, Looking at web hosting preferences, issues about dragging items to an iTunes playlist. On that one, you can't do a straight drag. It doesn't, if you take a playlist and you try to drag it onto, for example, a USB drive, you can't quite do it that way because iTunes, instead of exporting the playlist itself, i.e., the music, it will export the text file with the names of the items that are in that list. What you essentially are going to end up doing is telling iTunes that you want to make a copy of the music. And I'll try to put something about that in the show notes to describe that in a little more detail. A couple of different ways that you can do that. I'll have the link to this thread because it's got some good solutions in there. Um, and As you can see, we've got a few things on the Boot Camp Assistant and dual booting Mac and Windows. I won't go through that entire thread. I will say this, particularly if you are new to it, be sure to and print the directions for the for Boot Camp Assistant before you start working in it. It's not that it's overly complicated, but it is easy to make a mistake, and it's helpful to have those things out in front of you as you look at them and see what they are. So have them either printed for you, or whether you want to put it in a PDF on your phone or on your iPad. That's great. However you want to do that, you want to have those in front of you. Also, some other things you want to. That's just a good idea anytime you are new to troubleshooting, to have the directions in front of you. I've mentioned before that I think it's a good idea to have your phone or your iPad or some type of digital camera handy to um, document things as you take them apart and put them back together. Um, I especially like to do that on the iPhone, since you can, on the iPhone or the iPad, you not only have the camera, but in the event that you need to go online for additional information, you've got access to it right there. That's a good thing if you're working on your Mac and you maybe don't have access to another full blown computer. Uh, I'm going to be making use of that soon. I'm tempted to do a teardown of my 2008 MacBook Pro and check out some issues that I'm having that are heat related that I think might be due to the heat sink and maybe needing to have some thermal paste reapplied on there. And speaking of troubleshooting this week, in our troubleshooting corner, I want to mention to you something that I think is a good idea, something that you might uh, um, you might want to take a look at. I've got my screen up here. Nothing great to look at the moment, but one of the things I want to be sure that I mention to you that's an issue with troubleshooting. Okay, and that is making sure that you know uh, the specifications of any particular part that you're using. And let me give you an example of what I mean. Um, Earlier this week, I ordered a couple of hard drive enclosures. I typically do not buy pre built external drives anymore. Most often, what happens is I've got a bare bones 3.5 inch drive that I need to put into an enclosure. Now, I've got one of these temporary enclosures that handles two drives, but the circuit board on the drive is exposed to dust or whatever is flying around the room. And so I only use that enclosure for drives that I'm going to be using temporarily. If I'm going to be using a drive long term, then I buy a more permanent enclosure, stick the drive into it, and go from there. And I want to warn you about two things that come from that when you buy an enclosure. One of them is read the directions very carefully um, before you buy them. I bought two different enclosures. I had four of one model and four of a different model. They might have both been made by Toshiba that I bought over the last year and a half or so. And all have one thing in common. If you read the fine print, and I missed this in both cases, if you read the fine print, it tells you one thing. They do work with Mac OS 10, they work fine with Mac, but there's one caveat to keep in mind, and I'm not sure whether this caveat applies to Windows at all. When I discovered it, I really didn't care. If you have data on the drive already, when you slap that in the enclosure, it's going to want to format that drive. So you're going to lose your data. You want to make sure if you've got a drive full of data, you want to make sure that you move that data off the drive before you put it in this particular enclosure. Now, not all drive enclosures require that. So you're going to want to check that out and make sure that is uh, whether that's true for the enclosure that you're interested in. Another thing that you want to check out. And I'm going to flip away from my screencast here for a minute and show you something from the camera here. Um, let's just get my regular thing. I hope you can see this. The lighting in the studio is not great at the moment. I may post a picture up for this. The end on this particular enclosure is not a standard. One end is a standard USB, but the other end, if you can see this, I'll bring it up a little bit closer. You may be able to get a look at it. The other end for this particular USB connection is is slightly different. It's not the same as a typical USB connection. So you want to make sure that you know. what these connections are going to be um, as you go about doing different things. You're going to want to be sure that you look at what kind of connection do we have. Um, is this something that I need or can use? Uh, Different. I want to make sure that the connections that I have in place are ones that can function. This is not a standard USB 2 connection. It goes to the USB connection. On one end, it's a standard connection. On the other end, it's not exactly. So be aware of what kind of connection the enclosure requires on both ends so that if you ever have to replace the cable, you'll know how difficult it will be to replace the cable. For example, I've got USB cords that have standard USB on one end and micro USB on the other. I've got others that resemble the kind of cable that are typically printers, where they're USB on one end and a standard, what's called USB Type B, if I'm not mistaken, connection on the other end, which is basically the kind used in printers and some hard drive enclosures. And then I've got this one that I just showed you. And I know you couldn't get a look at that. The lighting in this studio is not great at the moment, but that connection is sort of a dual sided flat connector. And that cable may be a little more difficult to find. So you might want to avoid that for a hard drive enclosure. In addition to that, the cable is a little bit shorter than perhaps some of you might like for hard drive setup. So had I paid closer attention to that when I ordered, I might have avoided this particular enclosure. The enclosure itself works great. It's just that that cable is not something that I would have chosen as my first uh, choice. That type of connection, I'd prefer to have something uh, with a more standard connector on both ends, so that if I have a cable go bad, I can just reach into the box and grab one of those standard cables, which I tend to have more of those around than this sort of more specialized cable. That's one of my troubleshooting tips for this week. As far as the Mac tips go, let's talk about something I hinted at once before. Let's talk about something that you may find true. Let's see, you don't notice it quite so much in Safari, but I'll show you. There it is. Now, notice when I look at the file menu in Safari, I have a save as option, but that's not true in everything. I'm going to get my email out of the way and get Boom 2 out of the way here for a second. And I want to show you something that may be a better indication of, of what I have in mind as an issue that you might like to address sometimes. Right now, I've got no real document up. As you can see, I've got text edit open here. I'm going to have text edit pull up something that I looked at. I would have had this up already, but I accidentally closed it. Now, as you can see, I've got a README file here. It's not important what that README is. Here's what's important. Some of you that have moved from, say, Snow Leopard and earlier incarnations of the OS miss the save as command, where you are able to quickly and sort of one step rename a document. And you've missed that in when you move up to some of the more recent versions of OS 10. When you move up through, say, Mountain Lion, through El Capitan, here's a fix for that. Now, as you can see, right now I've got the standard text edit window. It does not have save as an option. If you want save as to appear as an option, you do not have to go back to Snow Leopard or something like that. What you can do, hold down the option key, click on the file menu, and there you see save as is an option. And the dialog then behaves as you would expect a save as dialog box to do. Um, that is true also for QuickTime. As you can see, I'm going to open something up here real quick. Just real quickly, I'm going to open a file that I was working on recently. All right. Now, if I were going to edit this, as you can see right now, I do have the export command, but I do not have save as. I have share, but I do not have save as. If I wanted the save as command back, I can press the option key as I'm holding this down. You want to press the option key before you click on the file menu. And now you can see I have a save command that comes up that brings up a standard save dialog. I'm getting a little bit of a beach ball here for a second. This is a somewhat large file, but as you can see, that's going to bring up a standard dialog. So anytime you've got a program that does not have a standard save as dialog that you're expecting, that might be something to try. The option key as a means of changing what's in the dialog appears quite often now in OS 10. For example, let's just take a look at this is something that I've mentioned before. Uh, on a standard volume dialog, all you see is the slider to adjust volume. But if I hold down the option key, now I can go into this menu and choose different volume settings or different input outputs, different sound outputs, sound inputs, without ever having to go to the sound input control pane, preference pane. So that's something that you want to uh, keep your eyes on, be aware of. It works in a variety of other things. In the airport utility, if you've got the airport little thing up in your screen, up in your menu bar, it shows you when you click the option key and click on that little icon, it shows you more data about your wireless network. I'm not going to even try to pull that up right now. And finally, just real quick before we run out of time today, I don't have this one up on the screen. I want to point out something to you about the alarm settings in on the iPhone with the current iOS, and I believe this was true in some of the previous versions. Normally, you can set an alarm. You can also, when you set the time of the alarm, set a sound that you want to apply, such such as piano riff or something like that. If I click right there where it says sound and scroll through the options, one of my options is vibration, and I can change the speed, change the type of vibration. For example, the default is called alert. I think we're all familiar with that. Another one is SOS, where the vibration pattern literally follows the SOS pattern, three short, three long, three short. But there's another option here that I had not experimented with until about 5 minutes before the show. That's why I'm not rigged up to show it right now. I'll try to do a screencast on this next week. Um, what you can do is under custom, it says create a new vibration. If you tap there, now follow the directions. Simply follow the directions. You tap to create a custom vibration pattern. If you tap every time you tap the screen, that's its symbol to vibrate. So if you want a very quick reaction, you're going to tap very quickly on the screen. You may be able to hear that. I've got, okay, so something very quick. You hit stop when you're done. You can play it back to test it. And if you don't like it, you can test it again. And you can save this now as one of your options. Now, what occurred to me, the reason this is interesting to me is that many of us, because of work situations, have our phones on vibrate throughout the day. And we use ringtones to differentiate who's calling. So, for example, your spouse might have one ringtone, Your boss might have a different one, something like that. Well, if you're in a situation where you need to be quiet, relatively quiet, but you also need to know who's calling before you pick up. I mean, if it's just a crank call or something like that, you don't want to be disturbed. You can assign different ringtones, different vibration patterns um to your custom call as a custom call. So when your boss calls, you get one vibration pattern. Your spouse calls, you get a different vibration pattern, and so forth. That way, you get the same functionality that you would if you had the ringer turned on. Now, I'm still testing this a little bit. I want to see, for example, if it works with the flash function, which it should, but I have not tested that. Next week, I'll actually walk you through the steps visually on how to create that, so that you can see it. I would have done that this week, but I literally discovered that function about 5 minutes before the show, and haven't had a chance to rig things up to be able to show you what's on my iPhone or iPad screen. We'll take care of that in the coming week, and maybe even talk about how I did that. And that's going to just about do it for our tips. We're running close to the end of the show time today. I did not go through a lot in the way of Mac news. To be honest with you, a lot of it is rumors at the moment, speculation about when the new iPhones are going to be released, what they're going to be like. I have seen a few comments about the developer release of Sierra, otherwise known as Mac OS. That's going to be the next release. I have seen a few comments about the developer release. I'm deliberately choosing not to talk about those right now. And I'll tell you why. First of all, I have not had a chance to get my hands on the release, and I haven't gone through and try. I haven't signed up for the developer releases. Haven't picked up the preview release, public beta yet. I don't think that's come into play yet. But even if it has, I generally don't comment on the previews because of one thing, particularly this early in the game. It's entirely possible that a feature which is being added or significantly modified may not appear in the final release. So generally, if I'm going to comment on something like that, I'll wait until we are closer to final release date before I start talking about Sierra and what its release is going to mean. I want to have some time with it in my hands, and also be have it be close to release. I'd rather not waste time talking about a feature that's either not ready for prime time or hasn't been, just hasn't been hooked up yet really well. It's no good to my mind. There's no point in talking about a feature if that feature is removed in the final release. And that does happen sometimes as you make things progress from one thing to another. So that kind of takes care of most of what I had to talk about this week. Last week I was out for, I had some family gatherings going on. Didn't do a show last week. My apologies for that. Next week, I'll try to put a lot of stuff into about a half an hour. Just this week's been a little weird and a little hectic. Have not spent as much time on show prep as I normally do. So hang with us next week. You can look for a lot in the way of Mac tips and tricks. If I run into some yeah, pre-release beta information that's helpful, I'll talk about that, but don't count on it. My initial reaction, both with the iPhone and with Sierra, is to avoid that kind of stuff. I'll have a few more tips and tricks. Try that option trick that I showed you. It works in a lot of different software. The most of the Apple programs have that functionality. I'm sure there are some third party ones that use that as well. So if you are missing the old school save as dialogue. That's one way to get it. Feel free to experiment and see if it's available in your favorite program. And that's going to just about do it, guys. I want to take a moment and say thank you to all of you for uh, catching the night show and listening. I hope that you enjoy the show, and I will be seeing you next week. Until that time, this is your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude on the forum. You've been listening to the weekly Mac Forum video chat, and I'll see you in the forum, guys.